She refused to step across the ranch doorway until the giant cowboy made one promise, and the silence that followed was heavier than the coming winter. The stagecoach had barely stopped before the wind scattered fresh snow across the muddy street of Pine Hollow. Every pair of eyes turned toward the towering rancher waiting beside his wagon. But he never reached for the woman standing before him. Harriet kept one hand on her nephew's shoulder and the other on her weathered trunk. "Before I enter your home," she said, "there are 3 things you must promise me." Levi Sutton removed his hat, looked at the frightened boy instead of the crowd, and quietly reached for a sheet of paper instead of the cabin key. In that moment, someone watching from across the street smiled as though they had already won. "Stay with this story, and tell me, would you have trusted a promise written before a single step inside?" The first snow of the season was never loud. It drifted across the mountains above Pine Hollow in thin white threads, settling over the wagon road before anyone noticed it had begun. By late afternoon, the wind had sharpened, carrying the smell of pine, cold stone, and wood smoke from the cabins lining the town's single muddy street. The stagecoach rolled to a stop beside the weathered depot with a tired groan. Passengers climbed down one by one until only 3 remained. A woman, a young boy, and one wooden trunk with iron corners polished smooth by years of travel. Harriet Lawson stepped carefully onto the frozen ground, pulling her dark wool coat tighter against the wind. Behind her, 10-year-old Miles hesitated on the coach step, his small hand gripping the brass handle until she reached back for him. The boy looked around quietly. New faces, new mountains, a place that did not know either of their names. Across the street, conversations faded. A blacksmith stopped striking iron. 2 ranch hands lowered their coffee cups. Someone sitting outside June Talbot's general store leaned closer and whispered something that disappeared beneath the wind. Then another shadow crossed the street. He was impossible to miss. Levi Sutton walked without hurry, his boots pressing deep into the muddy snow. He stood well over every other man nearby, broad enough that his heavy coat seemed almost too small across his shoulders. His hat sat low, hiding most of his face except the rough line of an old scar disappearing beneath his beard. When he reached them, he removed his hat first. He stopped several feet away, far enough that Harriet never had to step back. "You must be Miss Lawson." His voice was lower than she expected. Not harsh, simply quiet. "I am." His eyes shifted briefly toward Miles before returning to her. "The road back to Santa Fe leaves tomorrow morning." Harriet frowned slightly. "If this isn't the life you were promised," he continued, "or if the ranch isn't what you expected, you don't owe me anything. I'll take you back myself." The words hung between them. No pressure, no pleading, no bargain, only a choice. Harriet studied the man everyone had gone silent for. Nothing about him matched the fear she had felt while reading letters from strangers describing Big Sutton. His size explained the nickname. His manners did not. Before either of them spoke again, another rider approached. Calvin Rourke dismounted with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. He smiled warmly. "You've come a long way, Miss Lawson." "I have. I'm Calvin Rourke." He tipped his hat politely. "If you ever need anything, my ranch isn't far." His smile lingered just long enough before he added casually, "I only hope Sutton Ranch survives this winter. Feed's expensive. Cattle prices aren't forgiving these days." Harriet glanced toward Levi. He neither defended himself nor denied it. He simply lifted the wooden trunk as though it weighed little more than a sack of flour and carried it toward the waiting wagon. "Miles," he said. The boy looked up cautiously. "Would you rather sit beside me or with your aunt?" Miles looked at Harriet. She nodded once. "You can choose." He hesitated, then quietly climbed beside Levi. Calvin watched them leave with an unreadable expression. The road to Sutton Ranch wound steadily upward through Red Elk Pass. The mountains narrowed around them. Snow gathered along the rocks where sunlight no longer reached. Levi drove carefully, slowing every time the wagon wheels slipped against frozen stone. At one narrow crossing, he climbed down without a word, taking the horses by the bridle and walking them through while the wagon creaked behind him. Miles watched every step. "Do you always walk here?" he asked. "When the road tells me to." The answer made the boy think. Later, after another hour of climbing, exhaustion finally overcame him. His head leaned against the side of the wagon. Before Harriet noticed, Levi reached behind the seat, unfolded his own heavy blanket, and covered the sleeping boy without waking him. He never mentioned it. Harriet did not either. The mountains slowly opened into a broad valley. Below them stood Sutton Ranch. It wasn't large, a weathered barn, a fenced pasture, a smokehouse, one sturdy wooden cabin sitting alone beneath tall pines. No hired hands, no bunkhouse, no extra buildings beyond a small tool shed. As the wagon stopped, Harriet climbed down first. The cabin door faced west. Only 2 windows, 1 chimney. She looked carefully around the yard before speaking. There are only 2 rooms. Yes. And 1 bed. Yes. Miles has nowhere of his own. No. Levi answered each question plainly, never making excuses. Harriet rested one hand on the wagon rail. "I won't step inside until we understand each other." Levi waited. "Miles goes to school." "All right." "He doesn't work for his meals." "All right." "He decides for himself what he calls you." Levi's eyes moved toward the sleeping boy, then back again. "All right." Harriet drew one slow breath. "If I help keep this ranch alive," she looked toward the barn, "I see every paper before you sign it. Every debt, every agreement, every receipt." The wind carried loose snow across the yard. Levi walked to the wagon. He picked up a smooth plank lying beside a feed barrel and laid it across 2 wooden crates. From inside the cabin, he returned with an ink bottle, folded paper, and a pen. His enormous hand steadied the board while he wrote each promise slowly. Every word, every condition. When he finished, he signed only his own name. Then he handed her the paper. "You should keep it." Harriet folded it carefully and slipped it inside her coat. Levi lifted the trunk again. "The bedroom is yours." "And yours?" "I'll sleep in the tool shed." Before Harriet could answer, he carried the trunk inside, placed it beside the wall, and immediately walked back out. A few minutes later, she heard hammering. Looking through the window, she saw Levi kneeling outside. He was repairing the loose wooden step beneath the porch so Miles could climb it safely. He never crossed back through the doorway. That night, the wind shook the cabin softly. Miles slept almost as soon as his head touched the pillow. Harriet waited until his breathing settled before kneeling beside the wooden trunk. From beneath folded dresses, she removed an old envelope sealed years earlier with the faded mark of the Fort Stanton land office. She unfolded the brittle paper beneath the light of a kerosene lamp. Most of the writing had survived. One line made her stop. Juniper Creek Water Claim, Sutton Ranch. Her heartbeat slowed. Then she reached the bottom of the page. The official certification had been torn away. Outside the window, another sound echoed across the yard. Hammer, hammer, hammer. Levi stood beneath the lantern beside the horse rail, fastening a lower wooden step so a 10-year-old boy could climb onto a saddle without asking for help. Harriet folded the letter again. If the missing record still existed, it might save Sutton Ranch, or it might convince Levi Sutton that she had come to claim far more than his trust. Morning came gray and cold. Harriet woke to the scrape of a shovel outside and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the cabin. Miles was still asleep, curled beneath the quilt with his father's broken pocket watch clutched in one hand. When Harriet opened the door, Levi was clearing snow from the porch. He had already split kindling, filled the water bucket, and left a tin cup beside the stove. He looked toward her, then away. "Coffee's strong," he said. "I can water it. It's fine." He nodded once and returned to the shovel. That was how the first week passed. A broom across pine boards, an axe biting through cedar, the rattle of harness rings from the barn. At supper, the three of them listened to spoons touch enamel bowls because nobody yet knew which questions were safe. One evening, Levi entered without knocking. Miles startled so hard his elbow struck the milk pitcher. White liquid ran across the table and onto the floor. The boy froze. Levi stopped in the doorway. Then he took a rag from the washstand, knelt, and wiped the boards. "Pitcher was too close to the edge," he said. He moved his chair farther from Miles before sitting down. After that, he knocked against the frame every time he entered, even when his hands were full, even though the cabin had belonged to him long before Harriet arrived. She noticed. She said nothing. The first real change came in the barn. Copper, a young chestnut gelding, caught his foreleg against a loose strand of wire. His frightened cry brought them running. Levi reached the horse first. "Easy," he murmured, one broad hand against Copper's neck. Miles stood near the stall door, wanting to come closer, but unable to make himself move. Levi saw him. He lowered himself onto one knee until they were nearly eye to eye. From his coat pocket, he pulled a clean strip of cloth and laid it across his palm. "You want to help?" Miles looked at Harriet. She gave him no answer, only waited. "What do I do?" he asked. "Hold this where I show you. I won't move your hand unless you say I can." Miles stepped forward. Levi guided him with words alone. The horse trembled, but Levi's grip never tightened more than necessary. His hands looked built to bend iron, yet he wrapped the injured leg as carefully as Harriet had once watched her sister bind a child's cut finger. From the doorway, she watched Miles forget to be afraid. Later that week, Harriet asked to see the ranch accounts. Levi brought out a wooden box from beneath his bed. Inside were folded receipts, feed orders, bank notices, and 3 small ledgers with cracked leather covers. Harriet worked at the table until the lamp smoked. Juniper Creek crossed the north boundary, yet Levi had been charged a monthly water fee for 3 years. She turned another page, then another. 3 delivery notes carried his signature. The dates made her sit straighter. "You were in Texas in May of '83? Levi looked up from sharpening a draw knife. "Yes." "And October of '84? "Yes." These were signed here. He crossed the room. His face changed when he saw them. Not surprise exactly. Something harder. "You think I signed papers and forgot?" "I think someone hoped you wouldn't look closely." His jaw tightened. For a moment, Harriet thought he might take the ledgers back. Instead, he gathered every receipt from the box and placed them in front of her. "You asked to see what I sign," he said. "Start with what I never signed at all." Their eyes held across the table. It was the first time he had trusted her with something that could shame him. A week later, they rode into Pine Hollow for flour, lamp oil, and school slates. The general store fell quiet when Harriet entered. June Talbot stood behind the counter, weighing beans on a brass scale. Harriet examined the feed invoice pinned beside the register. "This price is wrong." June adjusted her spectacles. "Whose bill?" "Sutton Ranch." A man near the stove shifted in his chair. Harriet placed Calvin Rourke's receipt beside June's posted price. "Nearly 1/3 higher." June read both twice. Then she looked toward Levi. "I didn't sell him that feed." "No," Harriet said. "But someone used your market price to make his charge look honest." Outside, Levi waited with Miles rather than crowd the counter. He did not step in when people stared. He let Harriet finish what she had started. At the schoolhouse, Sarah Wilkes looked Miles over and suggested placing him with the youngest readers. "He has missed several weeks," she said. "Test him," Harriet replied. Sarah raised an eyebrow, but handed Miles a primer and then a county map. He read without stumbling. When asked to point out the northern creek branches, he traced Juniper Creek, Red Elk Pass, and the old freight road with one finger. Outside the window, Levi lowered his head to hide a smile. Miles saw him. For a brief moment, the boy smiled back. It did not last. On the road home, two older boys passed them on horseback. One called out, "Ask Big Sutton what happened to his brother." The other laughed. Miles sat rigid beside Harriet until the ranch came into view. That night, after supper, he faced Levi across the table. "Did you leave your brother under the rocks?" The stove gave a soft iron tick. Levi did not move. "I didn't bring Eli home," he said. Nothing more. Miles looked at him for a long time. The next morning, he did not follow Levi to the barn. That evening, he turned his new school chair so its back faced the door. After midnight, when the cabin had gone still, Harriet lit the lamp again. She unfolded the old Fort Stanton letter and placed it beside Levi's water receipts. Near the bottom, beneath the damaged seal, one witness name remained clear. Levi Sutton. Harriet stared at it until the flame bent low. The dead man at the center of Pine Hollow's oldest rumor had also been the last known witness to her family's claim on Juniper Creek. Snow closed Red Elk Pass 3 days later. It came through the night without thunder, piling against the cabin walls and burying the wagon road beneath a smooth white silence. By morning, the fence posts looked half their height, and the barn roof carried a burden Levi checked every few hours with a long-handled rake. For weeks, the three of them had nowhere else to go. Harriet divided their days carefully: lessons after breakfast, ranch accounts before noon, mending and food stores in the afternoon. Levi worked outside until the light failed, then came in with snow caught in his beard and sat near the stove without asking anyone to move. Miles still kept his chair turned away from the door. Levi noticed. He never changed it back. One morning, Miles woke to find a small pine desk beneath the east window. The legs were uneven in the way handmade things sometimes were, but the writing surface sat level. A shallow drawer held 2 pencils, a slate rag, and a wooden ruler marked by hand. Miles ran his fingers over the smooth edge. "Did he make this?" Harriet folded a blanket at the foot of the bed. "You could ask him." The boy looked through the window. Levi was already crossing the yard toward the cattle shed, carrying a sack of salt over one shoulder. Miles opened the drawer again. He did not ask. Winter made the ranch accounts more urgent. The hayloft was less than half full. 2 cows had begun losing weight. A steer with a bad hip would not survive the deep cold if they kept him only for pride. Harriet spread the ledger pages across the table. "We sell 6 head now." Levi stood by the stove, warming his hands around a tin cup. "Those cows came from my first breeding line. They also eat the same hay as the rest." "I know what they eat." "Then you know what remains." His eyes lifted. The room went still. Harriet turned the ledger so he could see her figures. "If you keep every animal because you remember when it was born, you may bury half of them before spring." Levi's grip tightened around the cup. "You've been here 6 weeks, and the hay does not care." The words landed harder than she meant them to. Levi set down the coffee without drinking it and went outside. He stayed there through the afternoon. The wind rose before dusk. Snow swept sideways across the north pasture, erasing his tracks almost as soon as he made them. Harriet watched from the window as he worked alone along the damaged fence, lifting rails no man should have been lifting with one arm. Then he stopped. One hand went to his side. He took another step and fell to one knee. Harriet was outside before she found her coat. She crossed the yard through snow above her boots and reached him beside the fence. His face had gone pale beneath the cold. "I'm fine," he said. "You are on the ground." "I slipped." "You're bleeding." A dark stain spread beneath his coat near the ribs. He tried to rise. Harriet put one hand against his chest. Do not make me fight a man your size in this weather. For half a second, something almost like surprise moved through his eyes. Then he let her help him. Inside the tool shed, she cut the torn shirt away from an old scar that had opened beneath the strain. Levi sat on an overturned grain box, his shoulders nearly touching the rafters. Harriet cleaned the wound with warm water. He did not flinch until her fingers reached the deepest part of the scar. This came from Red Elk Pass, she said. Yes. From the day Eli died? His breath slowed. The lantern hissed above them. I went back for him, Levi said. The slope broke loose before I reached the wagon. A rock pinned me there. Harriet tied the bandage firmly. When did they find you? Next morning. And Eli? He looked toward the closed door. They found his coat, not him. The wind pressed snow against the wall. Why did you let people believe you abandoned him? Levi's jaw moved once. Because I came home. The answer was so plain, it carried more weight than anger. Harriet sat back on her heels. Surviving is not the same as leaving someone. Took me years to learn there was a difference. He looked down at her hands against the white cloth. I'm still not sure I believe it every day. The next morning, Levi placed the key to the account box beside Harriet's coffee. Then he added the ranch seal. She looked at both. You understand what you're giving me? Yes. And if I sell the 6 head? Sell the 8 weakest. Harriet raised her eyes. Levi took his coat from the peg. The split seam she had noticed the night before hung open near the shoulder. He left without another word. By supper, the coat was mended and waiting beside the stove. Neither of them mentioned it. Their closeness grew in such quiet exchanges. Levi warmed wash water before dawn. Harriet poured the stronger coffee into his cup. He fixed the loose hinge on her trunk. She kept a clean strip of linen near the stove for his ribs. At night, after Miles slept, they sometimes sat across from one another while the fire settled into red coals. No one forced conversation. No one hurried away from the silence. Then Miles heard about the bank. A freight driver stopped at the ranch after the pass briefly cleared and mentioned that Sutton Ranch might be taken before summer if the disputed fees remained unpaid. Miles said nothing. The next morning, his bed was empty. His coat was gone. So was the broken pocket watch. Levi found the first small boot print beyond the woodpile, the second near the north fence. Then the trail turned toward Red Elk Pass. He saddled Copper and rode into the snow. Harriet waited at the cabin, feeding the stove, checking the road, refusing to imagine the mountain swallowing another boy from Sutton Ranch. Near dusk, a horse appeared through the white. Levi rode with one arm around Miles, the boy wrapped inside his heavy coat. Snow clung to both of them. Harriet ran into the yard. Miles was shaking but awake. I thought Pa might have left papers at the old mail station, he whispered. I thought I could save the ranch. Levi lifted him down. He did not scold him. He only crouched until their faces were level. A child beneath my roof does not get left on that mountain. Miles stared at him. Then his fingers closed around Levi's collar. Levi carried him inside. Harriet followed and stopped. The lock on her trunk hung crooked. The lid had been forced open. Clothes lay across the floor. She dropped to her knees and reached beneath the folded dresses. The Fort Stanton letter was gone. Behind the cabin, half covered by fresh snow, ran a line of horseshoe prints. Each shoe carried the narrow split mark used on Calvin Rourke's breeding stock. Levi turned toward the barn. Harriet stepped in front of him. Move. No. He came into my house. Our house, she said, and you promised not to decide its fate without me. His face hardened. For a moment, he looked large enough to move her aside without effort. He did not touch her. Harriet reached into her apron and removed the copy she had made by hand. There is something I should have told you. Levi looked down at the page. Eli witnessed a water claim for my sister's husband. The claim runs through the old Sutton boundary. His eyes found the name at the bottom. Levi Sutton. The barn lantern moved in the wind behind him. You knew? I knew part of it. How long? Since the first night. The silence between them changed. Not empty now, wounded. Harriet held his gaze even as her voice lowered. I did not come here for your land. But I was afraid that if I showed you this before you knew me, you would never believe that. Levi folded the copy once, then again. He did not accuse her. That hurt more than anger might have. He walked past her into the barn and closed the door quietly behind him. Harriet remained in the snow, listening to the latch settle into place. For the first time since she stepped down from the stagecoach, she did not know whether the promise at the threshold would be strong enough to hold them together. Levi came back to the cabin before dawn. Snow had gathered along the shoulders of his coat. He stood just inside the door, removed his hat, and looked toward the stove where Harriet sat with the copied letter folded beneath one hand. Miles slept in the other room. Neither of them spoke at first. Levi crossed to the table and set the ranch seal in front of her. Harriet looked at it. I thought you might take this back. You found debts I never made. That does not erase what I kept from you. No. The word was quiet. Levi pulled out the chair across from her, but did not sit. You knew the claim might touch Sutton land. I knew it might touch the old boundary. I did not know whether the record still existed. And Eli's name. I learned that after we went to town. His eyes lowered to the paper. Harriet held herself still. I have spent too many years watching men turn marriage into ownership, she said. I would not let you believe I came here with a claim hidden beneath my dresses. Levi finally sat. Sha, you came here before you knew the water fees were false. Yes. You kept the books before you knew that letter could help you. Yes. He pushed the ranch seal closer to her. Then keep doing the work. Harriet studied his face. There was no forgiveness in it yet. Not fully. But there was room. That afternoon, Calvin Rourke rode into the yard with 2 men behind him and a leather document case strapped to his saddle. The snow had begun to melt along the southern fence, leaving the ground dark and soft beneath the horses. Calvin dismounted, smiling. I thought we might settle this before the bank does it for us. Levi stood by the corral gate, a hammer hanging loose in one hand. Harriet came out carrying the account book. Calvin opened the case and laid a contract across the wagon bed. 3 years of unpaid water fees, feed debt, interest, a transfer of eastern grazing land. Then the final clause. Harriet read it twice. She tore the page free. Calvin's smile disappeared. What do you think you're doing? She let the paper fall into the mud. This says Miles and I may remain here as household labor after the sale. It offers security. It prices 2 people as part of the property. Calvin glanced toward Levi. Seems Big Sutton brought home more trouble than help. Levi's hand tightened around this hammer. Calvin saw it and smiled again. Careful. Eli never did learn what happened when a Sutton temper got loose. The yard went silent. Miles stood behind the cabin door, listening. Levi took one slow step forward. Calvin's men shifted in their saddles. Harriet watched Levi's face. His shoulders looked wide enough to block the whole gate. The hammer could have ended the argument before anyone breathed again. Instead, Levi set it on the fence post. He opened the gate. You can leave now. Calvin did not move. Levi said nothing more. That was worse. The horses began backing before their riders asked them to. Calvin mounted with his jaw clenched. You'll sign before spring is done. Levi closed the gate after him. Only then did Harriet see the faint shake in his injured hand. 2 days later, she took the forged receipts to June Talbot. June cleared a space on the general store counter and brought out an old freight ledger bound in blue cloth. Together they compared dates, ink, seals, and delivery weights. One receipt claimed 40 sacks of feed had reached Sutton Ranch on June 14, 1884. June turned 3 pages. That wagon never left Pine Hollow. Axle broke behind the church. Another claimed Levi signed for winter grain while he was driving cattle near Amarillo. June tapped the page with one finger. Calvin bought the grain himself. Harriet copied every entry. Miles sat near the stove, drawing creek lines on scrap paper. After a while, he looked up. My pa showed me a stone marker once. Harriet paused. What kind? Flat on top. Had a horseshoe cut into it. June looked toward the north window. Old survey mark. Miles traced a line from Juniper Creek toward the Sutton boundary. It was near the bend where the cottonwoods split. By noon, they had enough to justify a trip to Fort Stanton. The road took most of 2 days. Levi drove. Harriet kept the papers inside her coat. Miles watched every turn, naming ridges and dry washes before they reached them. The land office occupied 2 rooms behind a courthouse built of pale adobe. Otis Crane met them at the counter. He was thin, neatly dressed, and too careful with his hands. Harriet gave him the claim number. Otis searched the registry, then shook his head. No surviving record. Check the older volume. I did. You opened the wrong year. His eyes sharpened. Levi remained near the wall, saying nothing. Otis brought out the larger book. Harriet turned the pages herself. One sheet had been cut close to the binding. On the next page, the ink was darker than the entries above it. This page was replaced, she said. Otis closed the book. You are mistaken. No. His fingers remained on the cover. Harriet leaned closer. Someone removed a claim, then rewrote the numbering. Otis looked past her toward Levi. You should leave. On the return road, Sheriff Franklin Webb waited beside the eastern fence with 2 deputies. Calvin stood nearby. Several Sutton cattle had been driven across the shifted boundary. Franklin removed his hat. Levi, Calvin says you moved the markers and took stock from his land. That fence stood 20 yards east last week, Harriet said. Franklin's face tightened. I believe you may think that, but the posts are where they are now. Levi looked at the fresh holes in the earth, then at Calvin. Calvin smiled without warmth. Franklin stepped forward. I have to hold you until the circuit judge arrives. Levi could have refused. Everyone there knew it. Instead, he unbuckled his gun belt and handed it to Harriet. Then he gave her Copper's reins. Miles stared at him. Levi rested one hand briefly against the saddle horn. Strength does not put a man above the law. Franklin led him toward town. Harriet waited until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Then she turned to Miles. You are staying with June. No. Yes, I can help. You already did. She touched the pocket watch beneath his coat. Now I need you somewhere I know you are safe. That evening, Harriet rode alone to the abandoned mail station. The roof had fallen on one side. Snowmelt dripped through broken shingles. Old root boxes lay beneath dust, mouse nests and strips of rotted canvas. She worked by lantern light. Claim numbers, freight dates, Levi Sutton's name. Near midnight, she found a cedar crate behind a collapsed sorting shelf. Inside were undelivered receipts tied with red string. One bore the Fort Stanton seal. Another carried Eli's statement that the Lawson water claim reached the old Sutton boundary. At the bottom lay a note in cramped handwriting. Calvin Rourke requested the marker be moved after the Red Elk accident. Harriet sat back on her heels. The station creaked around her. For years, the truth had been waiting in a box no one thought worth opening. She brought the papers to Franklin before sunrise. By noon, a boy from Fort Stanton arrived with a message from Otis Crane. He would testify. He had the original registry page. He would reach Pine Hollow by nightfall. But darkness came without him. Then the rain began. At first, it tapped lightly against the jailhouse windows. By midnight, it struck the roofs in hard, steady sheets. A rider reached town near dawn, soaked through and breathing hard. "Wagon went over below Red Elk Pass," he said. "Saw one wheel in the wash. No sign of Crane." Harriet looked toward the jail cell where Levi stood behind the bars. Outside, snowmelt poured down the street toward Juniper Creek. Otis was missing. The original record was missing with him. And while the water rose, Calvin Rourke was preparing to take Sutton Ranch before the court ever heard the truth. Rain fell without mercy through the rest of the night. By sunrise, Juniper Creek had become a wide ribbon of brown water, carrying broken branches, fence rails, and chunks of melting snow toward the valley below. The bridge near the school groaned under the force of the current. Men filled sandbags. Women carried blankets and dry food into the church. Horses stood restless beneath soaked blankets, their ears pinned against the steady roar of the storm. Sheriff Franklin Webb unlocked Levi's cell before dawn. "You know the old drainage cut through Red Elk Pass better than anyone," he said. "If we don't open it, this whole valley goes under." Levi stepped outside without asking another question. Waiting beside the porch stood Calvin Rourke. His expensive coat was soaked through. "My lower pasture is already flooding," Calvin admitted quietly. "Help me open that channel." Levi looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned toward the saddled horses. "We're not saving your pasture," he said. "We're saving the town." Harriet was already moving through Pine Hollow with her sleeves rolled above her wrists. She organized neighbors into small groups without raising her voice. Older children carried books and supplies from the schoolhouse. Stronger hands stacked timber against the bridge supports. June Talbot opened her store for blankets, lantern oil, and coffee without asking anyone to pay. Miles spread a hand-drawn map across a dry barrel beneath the church porch. "The old channel runs here," he said, tracing the line with one finger. "Pa showed me this bend years ago." Harriet followed the map. "If Levi reaches this point first, the water will turn away from the bridge." No one questioned the boy. They simply started moving. High above the valley, rain mixed with melting snow until every step along Red Elk Pass became dangerous. Levi worked with 3 ranchers, driving shovels into gravel and clearing fallen logs from the abandoned drainage trench. Mud clung to their boots. Water rushed around their knees. Below them, another shout echoed through the storm. Miles had wandered farther upstream while searching for the stone marker. Instead, he found the broken wagon. One wheel remained trapped beneath a fallen pine. "Mr. Crane!" he shouted. A weak answer came from beneath the wreckage. Otis Crane was alive. His shoulder was pinned beneath a beam, but his coat remained wrapped tightly around a leather satchel. Levi reached them minutes later. Together they lifted the broken timber just enough for Otis to crawl free. The clerk held the satchel against his chest. I kept it dry." Inside lay the missing registry page, the original water claim, the survey notes, and a signed statement Otis had written the night before leaving Fort Stanton. His voice trembled. "Calvin paid my debts, told me to remove the claim, and move the boundary records." Rain washed the mud from the papers as Harriet carefully wrapped them inside oilcloth. Then the mountain shook. A section of wet earth broke loose above the trail. "Move!" Levi shouted. Everyone scrambled. Calvin tried to grab the satchel from Harriet's hands. His boots slipped on the soaked stone. He slid toward the edge where the hillside dropped into the flooded gorge. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Levi could have. He could have stood still. Instead, he threw himself flat into the mud and reached down with his injured arm. Their hands met only at the fingertips. Then Levi caught Calvin's wrist. Every muscle across his shoulders tightened. The old wound beneath his ribs opened again. Slowly, inch by inch, he pulled Calvin back onto solid ground. Neither man spoke. Sheriff Webb arrived with 2 deputies only moments later. Otis looked toward them, then toward Calvin. "I have to tell the truth," His words came quietly. It wasn't Levi who abandoned Eli. Rain drummed against the rocks. Otis continued. Calvin rode ahead during the slide. Eli turned back looking for him. Levi went back for both of them. He pushed Calvin clear before the mountain came down. Calvin lowered his head. I let them believe otherwise. No one answered. The silence carried farther than any accusation. By afternoon, the old drainage trench finally broke open. A wall of muddy water rushed through the channel and away from Pine Hollow. The bridge held. The school remained standing. The church bell rang once. Only once. It was enough. Later, beneath a clearing sky, Levi sat beside the weathered survey stone marked with the faded outline of a horseshoe. His hands were stained with mud. His coat hung open where Harriet had wrapped fresh bandages around his ribs. Miles walked over slowly. Without a word, he placed the broken pocket watch into Levi's palm. Then he sat beside him. After a long while, the boy spoke. Papa Levi. Levi closed his fingers around the watch. He could not answer immediately. Harriet watched from several yards away. When Levi finally stood, he did not call for her. He simply held out one hand. She crossed the remaining distance herself. 2 weeks later, the courtroom at Fort Stanton filled before sunrise. The restored registry, Levi Sutton's witness statement, and Otis Crane's sworn testimony erased every false water charge tied to Sutton Ranch. Calvin Rourke lost the disputed grazing ground and was ordered to surrender the forged claims. The real debts remained. Harriet insisted they would pay those honestly. She reorganized the ranch books, negotiated fair contracts with June Talbot for dried produce and trained horses, and balanced every receipt down to the last nickel. By late summer, the ranch belonged to no bank. It belonged to the people who had rebuilt it. On a warm evening, Levi unfolded one final document across the kitchen table. The new deed. Harriet read it twice. Levi Sutton, Harriet Lawson, joint owners of Sutton Ranch. She looked up quietly. What if I had decided not to stay? Levi smiled for the first time without trying to hide it. Your work earned your name before your heart ever could. Harriet reached across the table. She rested one hand against his chest, right above the steady beat she had once wondered if anyone else had ever truly heard. Outside, Juniper Creek flowed calmly beneath the evening light. Inside the cabin, there was no longer any doubt about whose home it had become. Levi had spent years believing strength meant carrying every burden alone. Harriet had spent just as long making sure no one could mistake her dignity for dependence. They met at a doorway with conditions between them, old wounds behind them, and no promise that affection would ever come. What built their life was not a single rescue or one grand declaration. It was Levi knocking before entering his own house. Harriet opening the ranch books and refusing to look away from the truth. Miles deciding, in his own time, what to call the man who never left him behind. It was trust offered carefully, then honored when keeping it became difficult. The people of Pine Hollow once saw only Levi's size and silence. Harriet saw the restraint inside his strength. Levi saw that her courage did not need permission from him. By the time their names rested together on the deed, love had already been written into smaller places. In repaired steps, shared coffee, winter ledgers, and a hand held out without demand. Maybe that is what a real second chance looks like. Not forgetting the pain that came before, but refusing to let it choose the rest of your life. Would you have trusted Levi after hearing the town's story about him? Share your answer in the comments. And if stories of courage, healing, and unexpected love still mean something to you, subscribe and stay close. More quiet mysteries and heartfelt journeys are waiting beyond the next ridge.